There's no suggestion that the Tunisian gunman, Seferdine Rezgui, ever gained his Islamist credentials or ideology on British soil. Yet today the Prime Minister responded to the massacre of Sousse by rolling out plans here to tackle what he called the radical narrative poisoning young minds. David Cameron promised a full spectrum of response to the worst terrorism atrocity of British citizens since the London bombings a decade ago. But what does that actually mean? And could it stop something like this happening again? Here's our chief correspondent, Laura Kunsberg.
This is what terrorism does.
Everybody run, just get off the beach, run.
We just saw bodies on the floor and getting picked up in bags and put into like ambulances.
We was all crouched down, holding each other. We was all saying we loved each other.
There was this man there, in black. Several rows of sun loungers away. Just stood there with his huge gun, moving around all the people, shooting them, just killing, murdering them.
For once, silence from the Commons. But the Prime Minister did promise, in his words, a full spectrum of response.
Mr. Speaker, we must confront this evil with everything we have. We must be stronger at standing up for our values, and we must be more intolerant of intolerance, taking on anyone whose views condone the extremist narrative or create the conditions for it to flourish.
What that means? The Home Secretary travelling to Tunisia, a huge counter-terror investigation here and on the ground, and help for the injured and victims' families. What it won't mean, any accelerated military response against so-called IS. David Cameron may have compared this battle to the Cold War, but plans nothing like the armed response then. Instead, familiar promises to work with allies in the region. Rhetoric aside, much of that response was in play before this attack and before the election. In March, the Home Office had prepared a counter-extremism strategy for the homegrown threat. There were to be new laws to ban extremist groups, close down places where they meet, and even control individuals. Necessary or not, the plan was then blocked by civil servants. The strategy, written by this former advisor to Theresa May, was too political just before the election, but will now emerge in the coming weeks.
There is a choice between accepting the pluralistic and liberal values and the freedoms that living in a country like Britain offers, and the miserable, depressing clash of civilizations that are predicted by the extremists. We've got to promote a vision of our society that's self-confident and appealing to people.
What possible impact, though, can passing domestic legislation have on such an international and complicated threat?
There is a hugely important domestic angle to this. The perpetrators of the 7/7 bombings were actually British-born and bred. There is a homegrown extremism problem. I think with the changing nature of the threat we face, with radicalisation happening much faster, partly because of online radicalisation, we have to do everything we can.
Few would criticise planning for potential terror attacks here, but extending government powers, that could be tricky. The Tunisia attack has not affected rebels' resolve.
I just don't think it'll work. I mean, look at 7/7, look at Charlie Hebdo, look at Lee Rigby. What's the common denominator? In each case, the security services of the relevant country knew at least some of the perpetrators. The trick is to actually find the ones and stop them, not just know about them, you know? And that means narrowing our focus, not casting it wider and wider and wider.
However full the spectrum of our response, what we confront, or are trying to confront, is a leaderless, twisted doctrine. And no 21st century government, however effective, however sophisticated, could confront it or make it go away on its own, no matter how hard it tries. David Cameron spoke to President Obama tonight. Condolences and promises to work closely together made. But for those affected, politicians' words can do little, while the actions of one brutal man have changed their lives so much.